Hello and welcome to The Drum. I'm Julian Morrow. Coming up tonight, the truth about the carbon tax, why the political debate is turning to honesty and whose pants are on fire the most. Is Julia Gillard really that cool with Bob Hawke's praise for Greg Combet? And who is the real Julian Assange? We talk to his former writing collaborator. Our panel tonight, former diplomat and columnist Bruce Haigh, former Liberal staffer and political lobbyist David Miles, and in Canberra, Annabel Crabb from ABC Online joins us. First, the idea of a carbon tax was never going to be an easy sell for the federal government. And the Greens haven't exactly made things easier by suggesting that there'll be no exemption for petrol.
Oh, look, I think this is a storm in a teacup. I put forward a view that the Greens have, that obviously transport is one of the sectors that should be covered, and that in the Greens' view, petrol should be included.
That gave Tony Abbott more ammunition in his campaign to prove that it will hit household budgets hard. This morning, the opposition leader wouldn't commit to rolling back any carbon tax introduced by Labor, but by this afternoon, he'd changed his tune.
We will oppose this in opposition. We will rescind it in government. You can be absolutely confident that under a coalition there will be no mining tax and no carbon tax.
Independent Tony Windsor also entered the debate, revealing just what Tony Abbott said he was willing to do to form government after the election, even on climate change.
Yeah, he's on record as saying it was more about direct action than markets, although previous to that he was on about markets. But one of the things I can say that Tony Abbott did say during those discussions, that he would do anything to gain power. Anything. So I would presume that that would mean, if there were demands made in terms of climate change or anything else, that it would have been on the table.
Well, in response to that, the coalition unleashed National Senator Barnaby Joyce, hitting back, claiming it was ludicrous for Mr Windsor to take Tony Abbott so literally.
If that stands to reason, then I suppose Tony Abbott was also just suggesting that he should change his name. They were also suggesting that we should move the capital to Danglemar. That we were just also suggesting that everybody wear a frock to work. I mean, it's absurd to think that his literal interpretation is anything more than another mechanism of Tony Windsor to try and get out of the position that he has put himself in and how he has so fundamentally let down the people of the New England.
I think we can be confident there'll be no one taking Barnaby Joyce literally on that one. But as the carbon tax again dominated question time, truth and political honesty were very much at the heart of the debate.
The Leader of the Opposition has never done, and what he will never do, is become honest with the Australian people and say to them that he himself has personally endorsed a carbon tax as the simplest way of pricing carbon.
Has the Greens member for Melbourne been more honest than the Prime Minister with the Australian people by at least admitting that the Greens have forced her to include petrol in her carbon tax?
There is no such thing as a no-cost approach, and what the Leader of the Opposition wants to do is make households worse off by $600 a year.
Why did she advise the ex-Prime Minister to abandon the emissions trading scheme in 2010, but is now proposing to introduce
the honourable
a carbon
member's
tax?
time has expired.
Say to her on the question of who Australians can trust to deal with the big issues of the future. Let's just go through the scoreboard. Tackling climate change, pricing carbon through an efficient mechanism, assisting households along the way, mired in the past and division.
The Prime Minister is talking about everything except the trust that people should have in the Prime Minister of this country.
Right.
Given the carbon tax lie, she told before the election, how can Australians ever again trust this Prime Minister?
And to the Leader of the Opposition, I say this: if he wants to have a debate about political honesty, well, bring it on. Bring it on.
I say to the Australian public, I will submit myself to your verdict as to which of us, that Prime Minister or this Leader of the Coalition, is the more truthful person in Australian politics.
Not exactly a triumph for political substance today. Lots of name-calling. Annabel Crabb, does the debate about lying pose problems for Julia Gillard after what she said before the election?
Oh, yeah, without a doubt. I mean, it's very difficult to make an argument that you didn't say something that there's footage and a print record of her saying that under a government I lead there'll be no carbon tax. You know, it's pretty incontrovertible when you put it like that, and kind of difficult to wriggle out of once you have reversed that position after an election campaign. And, you know, the truth of the answer, you know, the explanation as to why she said that she was completely freaking out, as was everybody on her team in politics, about this sort of idea of the great big tax that Tony Abbott was making so much mileage out of, you know, doesn't really wash too well. So that's why she's got to, you know, explain her decision now as a product of changing political circumstances. But it's absolutely a problem for her, because people, you know, can see and remember her saying it, and to see her doing something different now is the sort of thing that's a problem for every politician. I mean, to be fair, though, I mean, neither side of politics has been at all consistent on this front. I mean, in 2007, Indeed. We went to a campaign where both sides of politics were offering an emissions trading scheme.
And David Miles, I wanted to ask you about that, if possible, as well, because Tony Abbott seems to have had a bit of a misstep today. Why wouldn't he commit to roll back straight off the bat and make part of the day's media about his changing positions?
Well, quite simply, Julian, I mean, he hadn't taken this to the party room as yet, or to shadow cabinet. I mean, people have criticised Tony Abbott in the past, including his own colleagues, for speaking from the hip and for committing to things before they'd had a chance to be ticked off, as it were, by either the shadow cabinet or the party room. Here he said from day one of this debate that he was going to fight it every second of every minute of every hour of every day. But as to whether he'd roll it back or would dump it should he win government, he quite rightly, I think, said, I'll take it to shadow cabinet. He did that today. He came out afterwards and said, that's it, we're going to knock it over if we win.
Do you think there are dangers in committing to roll back, in particular for the business community? I mean, they'll want certainty once this scheme is in, won't they?
Well, it's got to get passed yet, and I think there's still a few hurdles before it does get passed. And what is the structure of it going to be? What's the detail behind it? We've had, you know, yet another sort of policy thought bubble, in a sense, that we're going to have a carbon tax. It's going to be 3 to 5 years. It's going to, at some point in time in the future, lead into an ETS. But what's the detail? How's it going to be affected? What is the compensation? All of those issues have to come up before this can even get debated in the Parliament. I mean, we haven't seen any draft legislation. There's nothing like that. I mean, health reform's like in a similar way that we haven't seen much legislation on health reform either, and that was over a year ago.
Bruce Haigh, Graham Richardson certainly came out in the press today saying that the government would be better to make the details of its policy clear soon so that people can start arguing about those facts. Do you agree with that? And how do you think the early days of the carbon tax debate have panned out for both sides?
Oh, it's sloppy. This is really sloppy. You don't come out with 3 pieces of paper and say we've got a carbon tax and we're going to give you the details later on. The closest I've heard so far as to what they're thinking is Combe on Insiders over the weekend when he talked just about electricity, and then I thought, OK, this is a punitive tax. They're going to bring this tax in to bring about reform, to change the efficiencies of the industry, and then that'll be passed on to consumers, but then some consumers are going to be compensated. Well, that's good that Greg was able to tell us that much, but that's the first time I've heard it spelled out in any form at all. Yeah. But Gillard has been really stupid, because she came on and looked guilty. Instead of coming straight out and saying, look, I've had a change of heart, I don't think she should have even done that. I think she should have softened up a bit and then come out and said, well, look, I've had a change of heart, like John Howard, if you like, and this is what we're going to do.
OK, Annabel, what's the vibe in the Labor Party room about the way Gillard has handled it so far?
Well, look, I think there's a bit of widespread relief that she's picked an issue and decided to go into battle on it. I mean, she's been a bit of a transformed character, I think, in her public persona and her parliamentary persona in recent weeks. And I think in some ways, you know, there is a great sense of heartening in the caucus that they're actually engaged in a battle. You know, it could be death or glory. I think it's kind of, you know, optimistically 50-50 if you're in the caucus at the moment, because this is going to be a tricky one to convince people of, and it's not like Julia Gillard is an established Prime Minister. She's a new Prime Minister, kind of still learning how to run a government, and this is a pretty major policy undertaking, and it's one that knocked over her predecessor with her assistance, of course.
Yeah, indeed. And of course, the man who will be trying to sell the carbon tax is Climate Change Minister Greg Combet, who's had his hands full over the weekend as well, after some comments by the former Prime Minister reported by Julie Bishop, apparently Bob Hawke, saying that he's not so happy with Julia Gillard's leadership so far. And so now Greg Combet has been batting off speculation that he is a potential Labor leader.
Breakfast with Bob Hawke yesterday, and we were laughing together about Julie Bishop's endeavours to spin this story. So Bob and I having a good old chuckle over some yoghurt and fruit yesterday morning.
Mr Hawke, though, has confirmed that he does expect Greg Combet to be your successor. Now, Greg Combet's older than you, so that doesn't suggest Hawke thinks you're around for the long haul.
I think Bob Hawke would happily confirm that he's a fan of Greg Combet, and no wonder. Greg Combet is a very, very talented man.
And Greg Combet, of course, was playing down the reports on the ABC's Insiders program as well.
I reckon that was done over a few glasses of red wine, if anything. It's nice of Bob to say nice things, but we've got a pretty big job ahead of us here, and I understand that's come through Julie Bishop, so I don't know that it's a particularly reliable source, the Deputy Leader of the Liberal Party. What I do know, because Bob's a mate of mine, is the tremendous admiration he's got for the PM.
Bruce Haigh, is this just a case of a few loose lips after too many red wines, or is there substance in this leadership debate?
Substance. And and Annabel would have a better handle on this one than I do, but I was in Canberra a few days ago, and the Sharks are circling both leaders, but I think Combet's reluctant, very reluctant to he'll have to be dragged into this, whereas Shorten is telling everybody who'll listen how terrific he is and how he was born to be Prime Minister. But I wouldn't buy a car from Shorten, and I'm sure there's a lot of other people around like that. So Combet, to me, has the substance to do the job, and he's got the gravitas, or in Australian politics, the faux gravitas to do the job. So I think it's serious, but it's early days, and I mean, for the Labor Party to change leader now, after the Rudd debacle, if you like, I think it'd be difficult for them.
Absolutely.
Just the fact that they're even talking about it, I think, is frightening for Gillard. And why you say Combet might have to be dragged into it, I don't know. I mean, I was having a look at him on the weekend in the comments he made. You know, he was pretty happy. I don't think he was too upset about being dragged into this. I mean, Shorten would be seething that Combet was being dragged into it, but at least he can take heart. I think Shorten's got better odds with the bookies. But
yeah, but I think Combet can see that he sees the depth